Hi, my name is Zach, and I used to be an alcoholic. Somehow I went from being a raging drunk to not craving booze at all. I'm making a series of videos to describe what I was doing when this transformation occurred. I was recovering from a traumatic brain injury at the time, so some of the details are a little fuzzy. I did make a number of changes around that time, though, and my goal is to examine those changes to see if I can shake something loose that will help someone else in their quest for sobriety. The first thing that I did was to cut back the amount that I drank. I couldn't quit, but I could drink less. Reducing my intake was critical as I never could have stuck to any sort of a plan otherwise. My body was chemically dependent, so cutting back was rough. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the therapy that I went through and my counselor, who was amazing, but not drug and alcohol therapy, just regular old therapy. Drugs and alcohol were definitely a problem for me in my life, a big one. But my drug and alcohol problems were just covering up for something else, some other underlying problem that was much deeper than that. So I was able to cut back on my alcohol consumption, but not to quit. I was pretty dissatisfied with that outcome, but eventually I resigned myself to the notion that I would always have this thirst. Instead of repeatedly banging my head against a wall that was just not going to give, I decided to focus my energies on something that I could have an effect on. That TBI had rendered me almost completely sedentary for a few years, so I was extra weak from that. All I could do for 3 or 4 years was sit around, watch TV, and drink. I was feeling pretty sorry for myself at that time. Needless to say, there were plenty of areas for me to work on. I began to exercise, but in a manageable way. I didn't set my goal at 50 push ups and then get upset when I couldn't do that. I set the bar nice and low, something achievable to begin with. I was so weak at the time that I think all I could do was like 2 push ups. The number didn't really matter. Two was all I could do. I just did that day after day, sometimes multiple times a day, and after a while, two became five and then 10. It eventually turned into kind of a game. When a muscle does work, it becomes swollen from the exertion. That's why you see people posing, flexing in gym pics, and they've got muscles popping out everywhere. That's because they have been lifting and are swole as a result. Before I would go out into public, grocery shopping or whatever, I would do a few push-ups in order to get pumped up. After a few weeks of doing that, my arms just stayed that way because I had built muscle doing all those push-ups. But my goal was to be healthier, so I changed the way that I ate as well. I never was real big on fast food, but I cut that out of my diet entirely. I try to stay away from processed food. That being said, I leave plenty of wiggle room in the phrase try to stay away. Sometimes I just couldn't avoid eating certain things. I eat lots of hard boiled eggs and trail mix and fruit, simple foods that I could see where I came from. Lots of hamburger and inexpensive meat. Hamburger is quite processed, but the meat has just been ground up, not heated and cooled repeatedly, chemically treated, and mixed with other junk, hopefully. I began drinking a protein shake every morning, blending it right in with my morning coffee. It's great for putting on muscle, but it's also much easier than cooking breakfast. The changes that I made went beyond working out and eating right, though. I began focusing on getting enough quality sleep. I was in my mid 30s and had been a complete night owl for my entire life. When I was young, I would stay up into the wee hours reading, and then I got older and video games were a thing. And finishing a movie always took priority over getting enough sleep. Well, I decided to do away with that sort of behavior. I made sleep a priority. I cultivated something called sleep hygiene. I started getting ready for bed early, no screen time for 1 hour before bed, and sometimes I would take a warm shower to relax. I noticed that if I got up earlier in the morning, then I would be drowsy in the evening by bedtime. I put a couple of grams of creatine in my coffee to give me a little boost in the morning. Another thing that I did to keep myself busy was to join a gym where I took various fitness classes like spin class and yoga. Spin class was especially helpful. When I was by myself, 5 minutes on a stationary bicycle, and I would find any reason you can imagine to get off that thing. But in class, in front of everybody, pride wouldn't let me leave early. So, 45 minutes later, all bedraggled and drenched in sweat, I finished class and walked out with everyone else. Yoga was another big one. Yoga was difficult for me because my muscles and joints are so incredibly tight. So some parts of it were pretty uncomfortable. But I always felt so much better afterwards. I've had a weightlifting accident from high school, and it's better because of what I learned in yoga. Back then, I was lifting incorrectly and had too much weight on the bar and strained something in my back as a result. Ever since then, it will take the opportunity to go out sometimes when I bend over, specifically when I'm standing back up, mostly when I'm lifting something, but one time all I'd done was bend down to scratch a kitty cat and my back went out from standing back up. I learned how to stretch my back so that it pops just right and alleviates the pressure that I feel when it wants to go out. I'm taking care to include these personal little details, even though they won't apply to everybody or even most people watching this. I'm including them in order to give you guys a picture of what kinds of things were going on inside my head at the time. I feel like my thoughts played just as big of a role in my recovery as my actions did. Before these changes, I felt powerless. After the changes had manifested, I felt powerful. I believe that the way that I felt had just as much impact as what I did. In my next video, I will talk more about power and how nobody is powerless. Until next time, hang in there.